All right. Well, thanks for joining, and we're going to have a fun conversation. Hopefully, we can all learn from each other. But let's start off, I think, with listen. We've heard about AI, and we've heard about using machine learning and all of this great new technology. And so, as a CISO, a security leader, hey, is your job getting easier? Is it getting harder? Staying the same? What's changing? So let's just start with an open question like that.
All right, I'll jump right in. So I think it's not getting harder than it was before. It was always kind of hard. And the threat environment is constantly evolving. There's always something new to be concerned about. It's just changing. It's just changing. We're now seeing the acceleration of threats. I think you're going to begin to see with generative AI becoming a thing, people are going to be able to accelerate in the time to attack and exploit vulnerabilities. So I think as a security leader, you have to then focus on thinking, how can I get my teams to equally accelerate? And that has to do with both the data and the response.
Others?
Hello, everyone. Steve Lodin. I work at Sallie Mae. You know Mike because he's been up here a couple of times. I run the cybersecurity ops team, the IAM team, and for those of you who were with us at the reception on Tuesday, Chad is my guy on my threat and vulnerability team. Chad. From my side, what's really different is a couple of things. The regulators are getting tougher. The attackers are getting much more sophisticated. And the SEC is really throwing pickles into the pot here with the 48 hours and then with Tim Brown and his Wells letter turning into an indictment. That's really making security much more difficult to address.
Yeah, great. How about in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, we see that there becomes more, the attackers become more sophisticated. And they got more money and money and money. And that's a big problem, but also AI. The tech kiddies can get it for free now. And just look up and trying. Yeah. And trying will result in an attack or hack, and then getting data, etc.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, and I definitely concur. I mean, being a publicly traded company ourselves, and obviously, again, the SEC and the rules that they're putting in place are definitely upping the ante, I think. I think there's also some really good things from it as well that I'm seeing that I would say in terms of, listen, the discussions I have, I think we all as security leaders, you say, hey, I have to have a chance to talk to the board, or I need to be, kind of at that C level. And again, at least as the SEC rules have related, I think that is, anyone that's not doing that has springboarded, or they should be springboarding themselves to saying, listen, I absolutely have to be part of all of the critical conversations at the executive level related to cyber risk, cyber resilience, all the way from, 8K filings and public disclosures. And I think in the past that wasn't always guaranteed, depending on how your organization was built and the dynamics there. But I know even myself, as we were talking, not that I'm going anywhere, but if I would ever look for another CISO role, there'd be some very specific things I would have to ensure were in place to make sure that my liability is not something that I would be worried about, right?
That's definitely changed. The discussion at the CISO level the last couple of years has been, hey, a really nice to have is D&O. Yeah. And today, it's now not a nice to have, it's a required.
Yeah, that was great. And as always, you guys say something, I think of a new question that's not on the list, so I'm just going to throw it out there. I was talking to someone earlier, and I think this is very related, where there was the conversation of, and kind of like, why did Qualys go into patching, right? And I think there were some questions around, hey, that's an ops function versus the security function, and for many of us in the financial services, there's these three lines of defense, and these very structured things. But I think at the same time, and kind of with this SEC background, I'm starting to say, hey, listen, if it's me that's on the line, I want my own tool potentially to remediate. And if you fail and the liability's on me, I want a backup tool, even if I don't have the primary, where I'm going to go in and fix it, right? If I feel I'm not getting the buy-in. And I've even had some colleagues now that are now CISO and taking over infrastructure operations. So I'm seeing this shift. I'm just curious if you could reflect on, are you seeing similar? I mean, how does that relate to kind of you and your orgs and your thinking?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's not always only about the tools. What we have seen within KPN is that in the past, CISO was very enforcing all the policies and all the requirements they had from a security perspective. But now we have changed and really guiding role and doing it together with the operations, because you are together in the challenging world of security. And now we have had an agreement for next year that in every sprint, in every DevOps team, there will be spent at least 20% of the time on security and on patching, lifecycle management, all that kind of stuff. So that's great to do it together.
Yeah, that is interesting. I mean, for me and what I've seen is I lead identity and access management. I'm taking over all provisioning for our applications internally. I've now taken over O365 and all those productivity applications. And with that in mind, I've then been able to kind of take control of the security of that infrastructure. Our company has 3 different patching tools. I control 2 of them. So I look at the things, the areas that aren't traditionally something people focus on, which is like middleware and the stuff nobody wants to touch. And we just take care of that. And I found that to be, not so much taking it over, but helping out the rest of IT.
Yeah.
Yeah, on our side in the financial services industry, we're still a traditional 3 lines of defense and segregation of duty and least privileges. So the security team is more governance, control policy. The operations teams are the doers. They run the firewall according to our standards, and we approve or reject firewall rule changes through a change management process. I don't see any real change coming to that in the near future.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I think the financial services regulators are pretty devoted to the 3 lines of defense.
If you want to talk regulators, you could start me for a couple of hours, but MFA and AI are on their agenda for next year for us.
Oh, yeah. No, that's great. And I mean, going into AI, so thank you for that.
Planned.
We look at and there's always new technologies, right? AI is one. I mean, I think people are still dealing with IoT and industrial IoT. Listen, I know plenty of people that are still dealing with operational technology on manufacturing plants and floors. But, I mean, how does that, is it just another form factor of technology and you apply the same kind of processes? Or are these things really so different that they're, changing your threat dynamic, your threat model in your organizations?
So I'll start on this. Again, financial services, we were not the first, but one of the first to go fully into the cloud. Our data center infrastructure is in Amazon. We've also gone into the SaaS environment heavily. So Adobe Experience Manager, Salesforce, Snowflake, ServiceNow, Workday, all of that. The question we get from our regulators, though, is, are you comfortable with the configuration and security of this? And until recently, there wasn't really good best practices. It's not your traditional Microsoft security best practices or CIS that applies to these. But what we have started seeing in some of our experiences with startups is a governance layer on top of that. So we were an early user of cloud security posture management. We're now a user of SaaS software security management as well, SSPM. So for us to get to that, answer the regulator's question, are you comfortable, we're using new tools to the marketplace.
Great. Others?
Yeah, sure, I'll talk about AI. So we very much approached it much like any other technology. And we first established a working group and a governance layer, and then an approval process. We gave certain ground rules on what people can use out of the box. what the use cases were that they could use it for, and then the process for seeking approval for anything that did not fall within those use cases. And then separately, from an IT perspective, we've approached all the business units globally, and we've sought out their desires and wants from a technology perspective, and we're getting ahead of it by controlling it. That way, people aren't running rampant, going off and doing whatever. So it's largely a governance exercise, and then controlling the way things are funded and rationalizing the different asks, because everyone always wants their own favorite thing.
Of course.
And sometimes, you know, you don't have the resources to get one of everything.
Third-party vendor management's a key to that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
I was going to say that's definitely where I felt the most like impact from us, where a lot of great use cases, a lot of existing vendors that I already had that suddenly said, hey, we've got, you know, AI capability to do different things within these ecosystems. And then the question became, hey, where's my data? You know,
How do you
you're using my
control it?
data to, you know, train your model.
Tell me what your model is.
What is, yeah, exactly. So definitely on like our side, it just was like this influx of existing vendors that suddenly, you know, one of the challenges is it's easy to turn it on.
Marketing-driven.
Yeah, and marketing driven for sure. And it's like a, you know, little toggle button, you can turn it on. Hey, and by toggling, you agree to the terms and services. Wait, who toggled that on? What are the terms and services? So trying to really get some control around that was a heavy lift, I think, initially for us.
Based on our regulator push to talk about AI and ML, I've been telling all my security vendors, please take that out of your marketing and say automation. That helps me get through my regulator
good feedback.
gates.
It's good feedback. Any thoughts on?
Too late now, but
Right, yeah.
Oh, it's not actually about AI, but about the amount of data we are getting. It becomes more and more and more, and we are looking into that with different models, data science models, also with machine learning. How are we getting the anomalies out, and how are we getting a model that will result in automation and more automation?
It's not really new either. I mean, particularly when you work in Europe and you run a large operation there, you got to worry about GDPR. You got to worry about where the data is being processed, what it's being used for, what the data is. Does it contain PII? How are you remaining compliant? So I think, you know, machine learning's been with us a long time. It's in most of our security tools. They're heuristics driven. So this whole phenomena AI is just kind of a hype cycle, but it's going to drive significant adoption, which is going to cause, you know, a lot of work for everyone.
Yeah, no, that's
Even
great.
regulators.
Yeah, definitely a lot of regulatory attention for sure, I think, unfortunately for all of us, which will increase at least my GRC team's workload and some of mine. Now, I want to get to three, before we run out of time, three questions as it aligns to, again, enterprise true risk, and not specifically the technology, but how we're thinking about, you know, you have to identify and track risk, you have to prioritize or categorize them in some capacity, and then obviously you need to either fully remediate or mitigate or have compensating controls in place. You know, not new to the security profession, but in large, complex organizations, you know, I think it's not easy to do this, right? And so I guess, you know, let's take the first one about like identifying and tracking. Just walk us through, you know, like how do you think about that? You know, kind of what's your general methodology? Is it one team? Is it multiple teams that do that? Maybe any best practices that you can think of that you could share with us as well?
all right, I'll start. So we have a GRC team in IT that manages the process and the flow, but we have self-assessments, third-party assessments. We map our maturity against the Cyber Risk Institute's financial profile, the next generation FFIEC CAT, Cyber Assessment Toolkit. So we're trying to do not only, in addition, we have audits, quarterly controls, and regulators. We take all of that data, identify gaps, weaknesses, and track that through a GRC tool. Yeah. There's issues stored there. I'll get back to the second piece in a second. On the technical side, we're using Qualys to map our compliance on the operating systems and applications against CIS benchmarks, and then vulnerability scanning. And all of that's kept in Qualys. But we spend a week generating the reports with that evil term called spreadsheets and pivot tables. To get that to all of the remediation teams appropriately, quickly. So we're spending a lot of time in multiple different tools mapping that. If you can't meet that, if you're struggling to get to remove, patch, or put mitigating controls in place, then we have the exceptions, which are also tracked in our GRC tool.
Right, right. Thank you. Others?
Yeah, we have a separate priority model. We have a segmentation, and we do a lot with Qualys, actually all. And the priorities is based on segmentation and also where the CVSS score is. And we now have learned that we need to do something with threat value and also with the true risk platform, that then you are going to manage risk and not only the vulnerabilities itself, and that it needs to be patched. So we need to make that move quick. And and the biggest difficulty is that there are a lot of priorities in the technical teams, and they need to solve also operational things and also patch lifecycle management. That's the hardest thing.
Right.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, you got to have several components in place. One, you have to have a cyber risk management strategy, and then you got to have a standard associated to it, like all the processes that accompany that. And we have a cyber risk oversight committee that's attended by senior executives, and we hold periodic meetings in accordance with their strategy and the associated documents, and those are all to be audited. And when we identify a particular risk, it's done by my GRC team, and that team, I have a person dedicated to a risk register exercise. We have a vulnerability management and patching team. That team flows those vulnerabilities, and we kind of have a methodology where we call parent and child risks. So a parent risk would be, for example, old application you're running for the purpose of, let's say, fulfilling customer orders. Meanwhile, it hasn't migrated to the globally used corporate system for that purpose, and yet you say that, wait, that application is end of life, end of support, and it could have vulnerabilities, but it's also sitting on end of life, end of support infrastructure. Right. So all of a sudden you have like a snowball effect where it keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and we then aggregate those risks into groups, and we have a decision-making period. So is IT going to prioritize the solution by funding the elimination of that? Is the business willing to let us eliminate it, yes or no? And if not, then we escalate it up to Cyber Risk Oversight Committee. We then get together with the business, and then if we can't solve it there, it flows up into enterprise risk management. And that's led by internal audit, and they have the right to then escalate it to the CEO or to the board of directors. And so I think it's time, and it's one of the statements I made during a conversation yesterday. It's time for CISOs to kind of step back, and security leaders to basically say, what am I willing to own?
Right.
And through flowing up into a mature enterprise risk management capability, you can now handle what you can handle, but hand off what you view as to be the higher level risk, so you don't get caught owning the
security doesn't
responsibility.
own all the risks.
You don't own all the risks, because many times decisions are made for business purposes.
Right.
To enable revenue, to deliver solutions to customers, to do whatever. But or sometimes there's a higher priority, and that's understandable, but you got to pass that off to the other people so other processes can take place. It is no different than any other enterprise business risk.
Yeah, but it's not only a CISO or a CISO organization responsibility. It's a responsibility of a whole company. So
it's no different than a supply chain risk. Like, let's say you can't get raw materials or parts or something, whatever.
Yeah, I think it's actually going to create another interesting trend too. I think though, where I'm seeing in some cases where CISOs are being looked at to kind of be the chief risk officer almost, right? There's a kind of this push to say, well, listen, if you're dealing with cybersecurity risk, which is one of our top ones, hey, why don't you go ahead and take these other kind of risk categories on, right? Like, hey, business risk, risk to revenue, risk to business operations due to, a pandemic. And again, I think some of those have fallen into like business continuity plans and things like that. But you know, I know for me, like you said, I'm thinking very hard, you know, when those conversations are happening, or even with my teams, like, we can't do everything for everyone based on what we're staffed, right? Like, and we have...
Maybe you shouldn't.
Right. So why are we taking that on? Why did you decide to take that on? You know, is that a risk we really should be managing? But I do see a lot of push to say, especially if you're doing it well. You know, I think if you're doing a good job, you're going to get the, hey, why don't you go ahead and take on all these risks and manage those for us? Well, we're getting close to time. Like any good panel, we got to one of the questions I think I wrote down. But I think it was a great conversation. How about let's wrap up the topic, you know, 20 seconds, let's say, per person, parting thoughts, you know, on identifying, you know, prioritizing, treating risk, you know, from your leadership hat, any advice that maybe you want to give to the group. 20 seconds. Go.
I would just say, like, you know, kind of what I communicated yesterday. You have to use the tools to their maximum ability. If you have tools like Qualys, you got EDR, get it out there. Deploy those things 100%, as far and wide as possible. People know me. We have manufacturing environments. They think I'm crazy. We've pushed all those tools onto OT systems. We've broken lots of stuff. We now have tuned them so we don't break lots of stuff anymore. But use the information that you gather from those systems. Use it to tell the story of your environment, the risks that are present, and then aggregate that into, like what you said, the pivot tables. Present the facts. Present facts to support your need for either more money, more resources, better tooling, or headcount. And then never walk into a conversation with executive leadership without something on your mind that you want them to make a decision on, because the whole point of getting in front of the board, the CEO, executives, is to ask them to make a decision. Fix that, eliminate that, remediate that, do something, because if you're just gonna show up and give them the weather report, what's the point? Don't even bother. Go back to your tools, get the facts communicated, and ask for something to be done, something that helps you.
So Mike, you mentioned taking down systems. For those that don't know me, I started in the pre-infancy stage of vulnerability management. I worked on and created and tested as a beta user of Satan. Who knows what Satan is? I took down manufacturing lines at GM by running Satan, by the way. So I understand that concept. Completely different now. Qualys doesn't take down anything, we scan everything.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. We've had to fight years of IT saying, oh, you took me down. No, you didn't.
What about Print Nightmare?
Stupid. No, didn't take down anything.
No printers?
From our side, we're really looking forward to True Risk. We've got our dashboards ready. We're getting ready to roll it out to hundreds of our internal remediation owners to take ownership and have a risk-based approach to that. We're really looking forward to that.
Love it. Thank you.
Do we also have 60 seconds or?
You got 20-second pitch.
Good. No. But I think you need to do it together with the security part of the organization and also with the technical part. Work together, get the tools in place, get insights, and and remediate. And that's the biggest thing. Do it together, but make it clear and short strategy. That it's clear for everyone. That's do it with Qualys, of course.
That's great. You know, I'll just part with a few, I guess, you know, all words of wisdom for people who live in the trenches. You know, I think some for me is try to change the conversation to risk, right? Like, again, and it takes time and it's a cultural thing, but, you know, move away from the KPI-driven, you know, hey, we patched 1,000 vulnerabilities, but were they the right ones, right? Like, I mean, I don't care if you patched ones that were operational oriented. I want to know if they're the ones that reduce my risk of exploitation.
Effort
right?
doesn't mean reducing
right.
risk.
Oh. So I think, you know, we all have to start talking that language. I think some of it is automate as much as you can. I think you guys talked about, like listen, if you can automate patching of at least the browsers, do it. Like get it off the table, get it off. And I think the other thing I would just encourage everyone is to, like, stop the endless debates that are just wasting our times, which is, hey, I'm not going to patch this remote code exploit because of X, Y, or Z. I'm like, dude, I am tired of talking to you. I'm not talking to you about it anymore. Spend the time that you're arguing with me to go fix the vulnerability. And I've just been a lot sharper with people about this is an endless debate that I'm never going to agree with you on, so let's just move on with our lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, this was great. Such words of wisdom from the panel. Thank you all for your time. If you could give them a round of applause, please.
Good job. All right. Thank